Okay, so we are back at it again. I just want to say good evening, beautiful people. We started up the conversation about 20 minutes ago, but then realized somehow we got disconnected. Not really sure if it had to do with the video that we were showing with a royalty free song, but here we are again. So I want to introduce myself. My name is Nadia Lopez, and I am the founder of the Lopez Network. And I'm so glad to have you here with us this evening. And I am joined by a collective that I love. And if you have been following us, then you know LVNG is all about loving, living, and liberating. Last week, Lashawnna was not here with us. She was under the weather, but she is back, and we are channeling all things in liberation in honor of Juneteenth, Angela Davis, and we are bringing the badassness. So we appreciate you staying with us, rocking out. But before we get started, we always do a check-in. We started the check-in, but I'm gonna let these beautiful people just tell you where they are in their minds, their hearts, and their spirits as we get into the conversation. Oh, so I'm gonna start with Lashawnna.
I am well, and I guess pensive, thinking about what it means on a micro level for families and school reopening, and then also thinking about macro, what the why the decisions are being made contrary to what science is saying is healthy and good for people. So again, thinking about how to help families navigate through this, knowing that they have to make decisions like soon and need to do what's best for them. So that's where I am.
Thank you, Lashawnna. And Verta.
I am in a very good, grounded yoga, heart open space. Got my practice in, been trying to meditate some more. And that's really important. I feel, I don't know, I feel powerful. I feel that I'm moving in spaces, this one included, that are about what I'm about. And really just about where it is that shit has popped off this week. I mean, like literally in the last like 2 days, legislation that's passed, like all the things that happened over the weekend because it was the 4th, the announcements that were made, the speeches that were made. And so I am really leaning into what does it mean for schools? What does it mean for us to be proactive, as proactive as we can be instead of reactive? Because I feel like some of it comes and I'm on my heels.
And that's real. And so, Geovanti, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I feel that, Verta, because it's happening so fast. I'm in a really good place. Mostly, I think, is because I'm taking time for myself, for my own mind, my own body, my own soul, my own spirit, so I can be filled and rested to really wrestle with what is ahead. Um, and I've been thinking a lot about the how of this change that we know we need rapidly, and the who of this change that we know we need rapidly. And some statistics that we've been sharing around teachers and percent of Black educators in public education and things of that nature really are making me think, how do we make this happen for the greatest number of people in the quickest amount of time? And it really is resonating with me, and it has for a while, that our Black families are really the catalyst for rapid change. And so I'm excited about just kind of getting some focus in that area.
So a little bit of housekeeping, and thank you for that, Gio. I'm summarizing in a second, but a little bit of housekeeping. One of the things that you may see me looking down, and you may see a couple of us looking down at some point in time, is that we take notes, even though we are participating in a conversation, because a lot of great information is shared. And the reason why we take the time to do this is because we want you to be equipped and see our thinking As a collective, if you're new to this conversation with us, we have all opened up schools. We've been leaders. We've served various capacities in education. And so when we come, we are coming out of love. But as Verta's tagline would be, but we're coming with a little bit of rage, a dose of rage. And we want to be very clear that it's important for you to know how to show up, especially when it comes to education. There are a lot of factors that stand in the way of the progress of who we are, because we are really dependent on the education system when it comes to our children, as opposed to people who are white, who may have access, who have the ability to afford private schools and can take their kids around the world and all of these things. And not to say that we cannot do those things, but in our communities, how education is instructed, those who are in our classrooms don't often reflect our own personal beliefs, our own mission for our children. And so we want to make sure that you are equipped with that information. But today, we wanted to really lean in as to what is happening when we're talking about the school system and the return of school. Today, there has been conversations in New York City in particular, as well as on a federal level. So in New York City, the mayor and the chancellor had announced that schools will roll out in September. They haven't given a definitive date as of yet, but there will be alternate scheduling. And the alternate scheduling is supposed to support and bring ease, to parents by letting them know what type of rotation their children will be on. So it could be an A-B schedule. So that means the child goes in Monday, Wednesday, and then the other child may go Tuesday, Thursday, and then there's a C group that goes on Friday and then Monday. And so there's a rotation that way. Or there's Monday, Tuesday for one group, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for another group. And so it's a lot of logistics that have to be finalized. But that's just scheduling. We're not talking about what will it look like for children getting on the bus who have to take the school buses, and what that looks like for people who have to be 6 feet apart. What does that look like for children who are already behind because they've lost so much instruction? And how are we going to make sure that they are able to close the gaps, especially if funding is being cut and there's no money for interventions, there's no conversation around after school programming. So there's a lot to be answered, but we understand that the priority is safety first. So they're very cautious as to how they're moving about, but the transparency is only to what the schedule will look like. On the flip side, the US Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, has decided that schools should just open. There should be no restrictions. We don't have time to roll out different schedules. It should be business as usual. Now, I'm just gonna say this. I don't know Betsy to be a principal. I've never seen her credentials of ever teaching in the classroom. I've never heard of her talking about her children going to public schools. So her saying what should happen in public school sector is a problem. But there's also her push around funding independent schools, providing charter schools with more money, that essentially is taking away from our children in public schools. And those schools, like independent schools, private schools, where parents can afford to put their children in those spaces, or have made a concerted effort to make sure that their children are getting that type of education where they're making sure that they're paying for it. To say that they don't have to pay the full amount and it's coming from federal dollars is of a major concern, especially when New York City alone is facing cuts of $827 million. So I'm gonna start with Lashawnna, because I know I said a mouthful, but I needed to make people understand just where we're at and why we're so frustrated, because Lashawnna is a parent and she's been through remote learning, and now she has to decide how or whether her child will be returning to school. So Lashawnna, just share more of your concerns and be transparent with your thinking.
So I'm probably more leaning toward the opt out, which is one of the opt into full remote learning, because I have the flexibility to be able to do that. And then I'm thinking about what supports I would need in terms of that, but I can circle back to that later. What I've been thinking about, because again, I realize that I have some privilege in being able to do that, and many families don't have that, and also have a lot more information and experience with education. So I've been thinking about what families should ask themselves, the questions they should ask and make sure they have answers for, and then also what they should hold schools accountable to answering so that they can make informed decisions. And you know, you mentioned something about like these AB schedules, right? I have one school age child, and I'm thinking, what if I had 2 or 3 school age children who didn't necessarily go to the same school? How do I make sure that they're on the same schedule if I need them to be on the same schedule? Like, what does that advocacy look like? How are schools that have siblings coordinating those schedules with families, right? So I'm thinking about school buses. Many children take school buses or public transportation to schools. What does that look like for them? Pricing, you ask yourself, what does my childcare situation look like? My childcare situation may look very different if I had a 5-day childcare situation versus a 3-day childcare situation. There were some other things I was thinking about in terms of like my children's learning needs, right? So how are the cohorts grouped together? Are you putting students together based on their academic needs? Are you putting them together based on some other criteria? Like how much of a role do I have to play in that, and how much are you communicating that to me, right? And then where are you getting this information from? Because at the end of the day, you haven't seen my child and you really haven't done shit to begin with. So you making decisions academically based on what, right? So again, holding people to answering that question. So you decided to do this. Okay, so tell me why. Give me some more information. So like I'm working on ways to be able to equip and empower families to be able to ask those questions and pause and wait for real answers on the school level.
I'm trying to figure out, because I feel like Gio's about to jump through the computer screen. So I'm gonna go with Gio before I get to you, Verta. Gio, your thoughts? Because he was ready. He was like,
yes, I was like. Well, one of the things I really liked that Lashawnna just said was ask some questions and pause and get some answers. Because the truth I'm feeling is there aren't a lot of answers. And you know, I'm thinking back, and I was thinking about this idea before any of this happened. Schools struggle a lot with this whole technical issue or technical challenge versus an adaptive challenge. And I'm talking some edu-speak here, but the point I want to make is that a lot of the energy right now is on technical things that really people should be able to sit down and solve and figure out. But they're not. And they're using these technical things, this whole schedule thing, as excuses. And by people, I mean folks running schools from the city level, clearly from the federal level down. They're using, you know, this smoke screen of technical issues. You know, what should we do? PPE, what's the schedule? Who's this? Blah, 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 blah. Nothing. No one said anything publicly about who did not succeed in distance learning in the spring. And how are we going to meet those students' needs? Because one of the things I think about working in a school right now, in a leadership capacity, whether I was or not, just in a teacher capacity, is who was successful in distance learning? Because some kids were successful. And who was not successful in distance learning? And how am I, as a leader, district, state, as a leader, how am I using my human capital, real human beings, and their talent to meet those kids' needs? Clearly, kids who are struggling are gonna need more human interaction. However that happens, it could be through the computer, but it needs to be live. It could be in person. We're thinking about a lot of the energy right now is on a lot of technical things, which is important. I know people are stressed about the technical things, but I would say that as a teacher, as a family, and as ed leaders, we gotta also be thinking about who was successful, who wasn't successful, and how do we use the human capital. Whatever the parameters are, figure that shit out. The parameters are there. Now, how are we gonna use the human beings to serve kids? That's where I'm at right now.
It's really connected to what I was thinking, in that there's a Maasai saying, a greeting that the Maasai would always do. And I'm not going to say it. Is how are the children? And they would greet each other. These are warriors that would greet each other with this statement. And I think we have really missed this part of the conversation. How are the adaptive challenges of what we are experiencing, like as a nation right now and as a globe, right? Globe, which means that there's a change in your mind shift that must exist. There's a change in our ways of being and a change in your paradigm and thinking. And we are not thinking about what those potential paradigm shifts need to be, about what it means to ensure that the hearts, minds, and spirits of children and communities are attended to. And so for me, and it's very connected to when I say I felt grounded today because of the things that I did, the things that are in my practice to do that. We're in New York City, and this funny thing I used to say when my 18-year-old and 14-year-old were younger is that when they go to college, everyone's going to know that they're from New York for a couple of reasons, right? One, they drink Arizona iced tea like it's water. Two, they practiced yoga in school from the time they were really young, right? Like it's like part of PE, like everyone's doing that. And so we have the wherewithal to decide that we need to have these wellness things in school, yet we don't lean on them when the time comes to actually figure out what the hell we need to do right now, right? So right now it's just this big movement to your point. And I always say technical things are important. Like I need an expert. If I have a heart condition, please give me a cardiologist that knows how to work on my heart and don't talk about it, right? I need an expert. I need a technical fix for that. But then I got to think about, well, what are the things that are happening in my actual whole life all around me? Am I drinking too much? No. Like, what does wellness mean to me about that? And I think that it's intentional. I can't say that these things are not connected to what is happening in the uprising, what is happening when you have Black, Indigenous, and people of color saying no more. And we have white co-conspirators saying, yeah, we done with that too. And so what does that look like? And so I'm really, I feel like that's extremely heady and it's not the most practical, but I think the practical part of it for me is if you're an educator or a leader, when these things are gonna happen in school, something's gonna happen in the fall, all those things. How are the children? How are their hearts, how are their spirits, how are their minds? And if you are going to go up and like fight a thing, fight for that in ways that maybe you have never fought before, which will require you to utilize collectives, cross-country, cross-state collectives, right? In order to figure out how do we do this better? How do we do this differently? And how do we make sure the kids are okay? And then the teachers. So this will be the last part for this, but all the things that you listed, Nadia, about like what's happening to open schools. What happens when the teacher gets sick? What happens when the teacher tests positive for COVID-19? Mm-hmm. Who's subbing? What sub is going in there? We can't even get subs now. So what sub is going in there, right? So that person has to quarantine. What happens if my aunt who lives in Georgia, where you're saying now, I don't get paid sick leave if I have to go take care of said aunt in Georgia for a weekend, and I come back and I get sick. Like there's all of these other things wrapped up in this that are deep because we're almost acting as if we're not gonna have people that test positive for COVID-19 anymore. Like it's just, maybe they won't test positive anymore if you have a country that decides not to test people. we just gonna have it.
So with that said, what was very interesting were the three different ways that you all attack this one problem, right? Which is why it's so important to have people at the table and people have questions around, are we going to return to school? And if we're going to return to schools, are we addressing all of these multiple areas that impact the success of our children, the community that we're serving, and make sure that everyone, from the adults to the children, are fine, right? Safety should be first. So when Lashawnna is bringing up the point that parents need to be equipped in knowing what to ask, because there's a lot of parents who don't have a choice and they're relying on their children going back to school, but they have no idea how their children are really going to learn, what's going to be the expectations, what the classrooms are going to look like. If their child falls further behind, who's going to be there to support them? There's all these things that are not being answered that the parents are just, again, trusting their children are going to go into the school, everything is going to be okay. From Geo's standpoint of bringing up the fact that the schools are so focused on the technical aspect of things, everything is technical, but we're really not looking at it from the soul of what do we really need to do to ensure that children are going to be learning cohesively at the levels with they're at right now, being gentle with them, because a lot of them are going to be walking in feeling fearful, overwhelmed, feeling like they're behind the 8 ball, right? Which does then create more disruption, because children who don't feel secure, don't feel confident, will act up or act out just because they don't have the words to say, I just don't understand. And you have adults who are going to be walking back into the building feeling anxious, feeling overwhelmed, fearful that they may be contracting something, and they have small children at home, they may have elders at home. And so to Verta's point around the concern about what does wellness look like? How are we making sure that we are literally being intentional about it not being business as usual? That it's not just about, we need to get to the numbers, we need to get to the data, we need to get them through this. Like, that's what our education system has looked like for the longest. And so how could we be disruptive in terms of changing what that looks like? So how can we really incorporate yoga into the classrooms and really engage mindfulness, not just as a buzzword, but as the culture of the school, so that people are ready and it calms you down. And then also just thinking about, what does it look like when we are actually in the classroom? Because we're talking about the classroom, we're not even talking about, what does it look like when you're passing in the hallway? What does it look like when you have to go to the bathroom? What does it look like if, for those kindergarten kids where the adult has to leave the room to take the kids to the bathroom? Like, all of these things, when now they're going to expect each adult to be in a room to make sure that there's only 10 kids per classroom. So where the extra bodies coming from, right? And there's no easy fix to any of this at all. We do understand that. So we're not coming here to say, well, there's an answer to all of this. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, when you have Black and brown communities where people really don't have a choice, we are literally putting our children into places where their lives are on the line. And not only is their life on the line, but our children are coming back home, and everyone in that household life could be on the line, right? And you have families who don't want to engage with the hospitals, don't want to go if they don't feel good, that's not going to happen. You're going to have families who are going to tell their child, even if they feel sick, they still need to go to school, right? And the child doesn't want to be ridiculed or ostracized because they don't feel good, because people are going to say, oh, you're the one with the COVID. Like, all of these things that we're not taking into consideration, right? And so my question to you all is, at the end of the day, every school is going to have to take accountability for how they're going to move into the school year. That's the reality. What do you believe those school leaders should be thinking of? Top priority thing that school leaders should be thinking of going in September. They should be working on it right now, unfortunately, but they want to have summer vacation. But it's crisis management. And so, Verta, I'm gonna start with you. What do you think?
So the first thing that comes to mind is talking to and having as many, I'm gonna steal from design thinking here and saying as many empathy interviews as you can with your community. And so that's really just, asking them, how are you feeling about this policy? I think that we need to, you know, um, tell me how how is your heart? How is your family? How have you been impacted by since the last time that we saw you in person? So it's leaning into using that, but kind of if anybody took over a school, right, that first 90 days, we said, what do you do in your first 90 days if you're the new leader in a school type of scenario? So this is not a school that you have started on your own, but if you're coming in as a leader, we talk a lot about that first 90 days and what is it that you do. And one of the key things is interviewing as many people as you can in that situation and talking to them. So I think the first thing is really, yes, there's all of this other extra noise happening and all of the things that are the technical solutions and technical things, but have you talked to as many teachers, parents, children as you can before September comes? So I feel like that's number one. And using a process like an empathy interview to get a little sense of just where their heads are at, right? Because to be frank, some communities may feel like, you know what, we got this and we got you, right? Like the parents might say, what do you need from us? Because we want to figure out how to make this work, right? Or there's a local community-based organization that might be saying like, how can we help you as a school? So I feel like that's the first thing for leaders to do, quite frankly. Forget what all the other is. Put your hands around and manage that container that is your school. I think the second thing is, what are the loopholes? So I just know that I used to have like a law book that like ed law book that I always had like right by my desk so that I could be like, okay, what does this actual law say? Because the thing is that things are given to us and we think, or we're led to believe that it means one thing because people want us to believe that. But if we actually read it, we can be more creative on what it means to find a solution to that. And the only thing I can give an example to recently, and I don't have the exact information, I might find it before we end this, is there was a recent resolution passed that if there were international students in the States, if your university says that you, if your university goes full on virtual, you have to go back to your country as a student, like they're voiding your visa. And apparently Columbia University and another university are finding a loophole where they're saying, okay, we will have you register for just the right amount of whatever it is. We'll provide that thing, right? And then they won't have to do that, right? Because it's a loophole. It did, okay, you gave me something and they just rallied around quickly to say, okay, this is our solution to that. What are the loopholes? Because there's always a loophole. And so those are the two things. Talk to everyone in your community, as many people as you can. And two, now that you're hearing these things, what's the way around it? Instead of having to bang your head going through it. Those two things that come to mind immediately.
So I have down empathy interviews and loopholes. Lashawnna, do you have anything to add?
You want me to go?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, a couple of things. So I was thinking from a leader's perspective, identifying what it is that students need to learn. So identifying whether there are gaps, the kids who need accelerations because they feel like during remote learning, you need to figure out what it is that students need to learn and how you're going to actually deliver that, whether it's project-based learning, whether it's, live instruction, however that's going to happen, you need to figure that out. And then you need to do a capacity assessment, right? You need to see who on staff is able to actually deliver what it is that kids need and figure out how to either support those people so that they can get where they need to be. And then the people who can't, you need to supplement that in some way, right? So if you are doing blended learning, I don't know how much flexibility people have with their budgets yet, but thinking about Verta and her loopholes, right? What were you spending money on before that you don't need to spend money on right now that you can use to supplement where your staff has limited capacity? Right, so whether that's additional social emotional support, whether it's additional tutors, whether it's enrichment that can't happen in school but can happen remotely, think about the capacity gaps after you do an assessment and how to fill those gaps to make sure that kids get what they need. But you have to start with understanding what they need, right? So too often we're talking in these generalities and these vague terms around kids, the gaps, and kids are behind. That's not necessarily the case, and oftentimes isn't the case for most kids. But you have to be able to say, this particular child or these children in this family need this. So this summer, when you have all your PCs who tend to sit back and kind of twiddle their thumbs, build their capacity. If you can't build their capacity, find an organization that can support that work. If you want people to be able to do remote learning in a way that actually makes some damn sense, find somebody to teach them. You cannot rely on a Department of Education. They are not coming to help you. You need to save yourself.
Geovanti? He was like, yes, all of that.
Yep, you cannot rely on the Department of Education, whether by intention or whether by they just don't have the capacity to get to the nitty-gritty of making a difference in people's lives at their level anymore. So as a school leader, I would be thinking about, my human capital, kind of going back to what I said before, because no one person, as the principal, you and the vice principal, you cannot meet the needs of a whole community in a time of crisis on your own and then present it to your staff to execute. That is just dumb. Please don't put your teachers through that stress. Don't put the families through that stress. Share the workload. So I'm thinking of 4 buckets. One is safety, obviously. Nadia's mentioned it many times. People need to be on the safety tip. Identify who they are. Let them dig into the safety. Let them dig into the actual CDC guidelines. Let them dig into what everyone else is using as their guidelines so that they know it from the horse's mouth, for lack of a better phrase. I'm not so eloquent right now with it. Let them dig into it so that they know what you all need to do. Don't wait for a news briefing where you're told at the same time as people watching the news randomly. So get them onto that. Emotional team. Who is your emotional team? I know the school I work in, we're fortunate to have a guidance counselor and a social worker, and we have a dean who also has a lot of relationships with families and with the kids. And sometimes kids will talk to those people when they won't talk to their teacher because there's a different relationship there. So honor that relationship. Honor that kids choose who they want to have a conversation with about their wellness and give them access to that. So whoever your emotional team of people are, and not just the title, I'm talking about people who are gifted in it, teachers who all the kids love, or, think about it bigger than titles, especially at this time. Who are those emotional people? Maybe there's the titled people, then maybe there's 1 or 2 per grade. And we say, you know what, A, B, and C, yeah, you teach this subject, but I need you to really focus on the emotional piece right now. For this amount of time. So that's bucket 2. Bucket 3 is academic. And I'm thinking about academics at this time as in grade levels, at grade teams, because kids are a cohort. And to survive this situation we're in, kids and their parents really need to work more as a team. Maybe some people's kids won't get selected to come into the building, but maybe there's friendships in complexes, in neighborhoods. We play together. Why can't such and such come over and they learn together? So parents need to think differently about it. Grade team, teachers teachers and grade teams can say, you know, yeah, we need to learn all these subjects, but what are we all teaching our kids on the 6th grade, on the 3rd grade? What's most important for this grade? And collaborate on that. Why? Because the kids and the parents are stressed the hell out. The work has been too much, and now there's all this planning time. It might be too much again. What's most important? Kids can't suffer doing all 4 or 5 subjects every day online and then working in the evening while their siblings are there. It's too much. So the grade team somebody on the grade team leaders need to be given some space to say what is manageable. What is manageable for our high flyers? What is manageable for our struggling kids? And let them dig into that. And then the last piece I'm saying is parent connections and collaboration. And if you're fortunate to have a PTA person, you know, or depending on your school, sometimes the parent communities within classrooms are really tight, sometimes they're not, but this is the time to think about how do we make, you know, this cohort, this class and their parents more united, more connected, besides just waiting for you to put out a memo through an email. So either that's your parent coordinator or just people who are good with parents. So safety, emotional team, grade team, parent connections team, do it. Do it.
So, because I was taking my notes, Verta started out with, it's important to have empathy interviews, finding out, especially with teachers, how are you feeling? What do you feel about this policy? Because it's going to be require a team effort. And so people need to feel that they're part of the process and things are not being imposed upon them, as much as it's like, let's be transparent. Let's talk about what this means. How do you think it's going to work? How it's not going to work? What we're going to do as a team to make sure that there is some success around this. Or maybe it's remixing the whole thing or throwing the whole thing out, because everything doesn't have to be the thing. Remember, the people who are actually creating these policies and imposing these ideas are folks who are not in the classroom. They're not in your school building. They are doing a PR service. They are doing what they need to sell and say that this is what's happening without understanding the minutia that goes behind it, right? And unfortunately, when you are a principal, you have to start sipping on that Kool-Aid to seem like you are being compliant and complicit, but you don't want to do it at the expense of children. So the empathy interviews is important, knowing the laws. There are schools like Harvard that I saw that are suing the federal government because they are like, how are you going to tell our students that if they're not going full time, that they can't be in the country and all of these things. And I'm sure at some point things are going to back down, because when you have those type of schools, you know, they don't want to go against the establishment. And then, you know, not relying on the Department of Education, because of course they don't have a bird's eye view as to what is going on. And Geovanti, you did come up with, Lashawnna spoke about human capital, but you also did talk about, you taglined and talked about the 3 buckets or 4 buckets that you had around safety, the emotional team, the parent communication, and then the academics, right? And what I think is very important for people who are in education or you're not in education. For me, I want to start with the needs assessment. And I think everything that you all have said is encompassed in it. And the reason why I say start with the needs assessment is because some schools didn't even have any of these things in place before COVID, right? So if you didn't have a safety team that was ensuring that children were fine, you know, in the event something happened, where do children go? Who's the go-to person? That's a problem. If you didn't have an emotional team that was checking on children and having conversations about, you know, what kids are falling through the cracks, what kids we know are the high flyers, what kids we know are the cutters, like all of these things, that's a problem. If you weren't having conversations and doing deep dives around data, and not just state assessments, just the type of data about how many kids are actually coming to school, what time do they get to school, what does it look like in the classroom, what are the things that we know the children are challenged with, and actually looking at their student work, so that this way we know who's going to be successful online versus who's not. Then when we get to this point of now going in September, if you didn't do that before COVID, and then while you were in the midst of COVID, you didn't do checks to even assess where kids were at, we're walking into the school year, everybody's behind, not just the children, but the adults. And guess what happens? People start to feel very frustrated. They start to get burnt out. They get overwhelmed. They tap out. They blame the children. They blame the parents. But in reality, and let me take a step back because I can't we it no more. Those who are in positions haven't done their due diligence to ensure that there was a plan of action. So what I'm going to say is, teachers, leaders, even if you're a parent, take notes because you need to be checking your schools. Ask the questions about what was in your school before, because there's certain schools that make schools successful that allows it to run as a well-oiled machine, right? There's things that you got to work on, but there's things that you should have in place. So you have to ask, who's going to be the academic team? Who are the school leads in terms of the team? What's the intervention that's going to be happening? You know, if my child is behind, is there going to be a plan of action in place? I just need to know those things. If my child gets sick, if they run a fever, where are they going to be held? How is it going to be communicated to me? If a child gets sick in the building and they're in my daughter's class or my son's class, who's going to communicate that? What are going to be the next steps, the expectations? We have to make sure that all the things that's going to make people well, physically, emotionally, as they come into the building, doesn't create more anxiety. And you know what I want to also say is that it's okay to feel overwhelmed by the process, but transparency is important. This ain't about you. You can't be in the midst of saying, I'm not going to let people know that I didn't know, that I didn't do. This isn't about you. Start right now, start reflecting and start thinking, because there are no Department of Educations that even want to deal with any of this. They are literally leaving it up to the schools to figure it out. And so the blame will be on the parents because the parents couldn't support their kids, and the blame will be on the school because the school didn't do their job. Verta?
I just want to say that this is an opportunity because I hear what you're saying there, but this is actually an opportunity to do things that maybe you never thought were possible. So just like I said, this balance between love and rage, balance between anger and joy, balance between all of that. I just want us to see the opportunity to thrive, because it's possible to still find a way to thrive here. And I think that, and it's where I want to check certain things, even about my language and our language, about even when we say high flyer, that could have just been the students who did well with white supremacy culture. What does it mean to fly high now? Right? I don't even, what does it mean to be successful at learning and solving problems? So I keep thinking about how do we not replicate the system that existed before in the answers and solutions and things that we're thinking about move forward? And one of the ways is to continually ask ourselves, is this decision a replication of the system, or are we actually going to dismantle with this way of thinking, colonize all of the things, right? So I wanted to say that, and that I want to just clarify that empathy is not just for the teachers, in my opinion. Those interviews are for all stakeholders. We actually need to bring kids to this table a little bit more, particularly our middle and high schoolers. And the other thing is, teachers, families have connections all across this country. They're talking to other school districts and they're getting some ideas that we might not even know about if we don't talk to them and say, what's going on with your friend who's a teacher in, I'm not going to say, I don't even know what state to say. Good gracious, San Francisco, I can't even say that. All those teachers that just got, was it Oakland? So I just want to add that. I want us to, there is opportunity here. And I think we have to see that as well. And it's an opportunity to, sky's the limit, to see what success in education, and you talk about this monolithic Geo talks a lot about this monolithic definition of what it means to be successful. Like we actually have an opportunity to break that barrier. Bring kids to the table, have them start coming up with some solutions. Because I'm telling you, they might have some ideas about how you could help them out. They could be like, this technology is not working because why are you using this? This mess is old. Can we get Slack up in here? Because if you gave us Slack and we could text while you're doing the Zoom, you ain't ever going to drop us.
And but to your point,
you always, yeah. Sorry.
To your point, Verta, that does need to happen. I think that we will all agree, though, what has made us different in terms of our leadership is that we were very well aware of what existed and what didn't exist. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are in positions. It could be a leader. It starts with the parents, right? The parents only know what they've been exposed to as students when they walked into the classroom. So they don't even know what the possibilities are. They only know what their experience is. It starts with, you also have to take account teachers. Teachers who are younger, who have come into the education system are based off of the education system that's based off of this education system, where there was no real innovation, where everything is around these standards, everything is around the assessment. There's no opportunity for creativity, right? And then you have principals who are sometimes afraid of taking a step out of the box, right? Because they haven't been supported. They're afraid of what that means, the repercussions. And I'm going to say, it's not to say everyone is like that, because there's some phenomenal new teachers who come in who have really, really great ideas, but then they get stifled by the people who are above them who don't want, like, let's not do that, right? And there was an opportunity within the classrooms right now when, as you know, we were on the pandemic where people could have done those things. So I want people to understand, to be encouraged. Sometimes you have to push boundaries for people to see what's possible and not ask permission. And it's not you trying to be disruptive and dismantle and be destructive. It's actually you trying to be liberating for the children that you're serving, because everyone is trying to create something, right? And if we don't come up with our own solutions, who's going to be driving us? The textbook companies that have their own agenda, the tech industry that has been collecting our data for the past 3 or 4 months and is going to be selling us all these products, right? And then people who are in positions who are using this opportunity for them to bolster up their resumes and go somewhere else. I just need to say that. And I see Lashawnna's face, like she's ready to say something. So I'm gonna let Lashawnna talk.
You to say that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lashawnna.
The thing that keeps coming to mind is to remember to be specific when you're thinking about plans and thinking about the people who are in front of you, right? The children have names, their parents have names, the teachers have names, right? Be specific. Don't make decisions based on generalities. And a lot of times the guidance that's going to come from above central, the district, is going to be based on generalities. They know, you know your building, they don't. So work from your community and filter information up. What's that term? Manage up. This is a perfect opportunity to kind of buck the system and manage up. And some of that managing is just kind of blocking so that you could get the things that you need to get done.
Geovanti, was there something you wanted to add?
It's not appropriate.
No. We have to start watching and we're like, yo, we both Taz and he'd be like, now he dropping.
Now he's like, no.
No. Honestly, what I was gonna say, Nadia, is it's a tribute to you. Let me just say this because it's in my heart. You've made some changes in your career, in your life, in your service to families and kids and communities. And I just think you're glowing. And I'm happy to see it. That's what I'm thinking right now.
Well, thank you. It's called freedom. And I'll acknowledge that there are people who are watching who are probably like, oh my gosh, she looks so good. No, I will say this, it was a rough week and a half, acknowledging having left a school that I love, that I had created, in a place that I have been ride or die, take out the Vaseline, take off my earrings and fight for, because I just love my kids and my families that much and my staff. But the reality is this, when you are in a system of oppression, it is literally like being on a plantation. And you are doing your best to help free everyone else. But at some point, the powers that be are not always happy with what you're doing. And in particular, folks weren't happy with what I was doing, or I wasn't made to feel good enough, right? And so anyone who's worked with me would tell you how hard I was on myself. But I was hard on myself because I wasn't paying attention to everyone else's data. I was only paying attention to our data. I was always like, we could do better. And we were actually outperforming and doing really well within the context of our district. But I was made to feel like you weren't doing well enough, right? And it wasn't really until and a lot of that caused me to become ill because I internalized it. I'm working so hard. I'm trying to protect my team. I'm trying to protect the kids. But I knew that there was a bigger picture. I didn't believe in harping on my team about state assessments because I felt like the assessments wasn't the end all be all. I was thinking about how do we make sure that kids, when they graduate from our school and go to high school, they're prepared to be critical thinkers, to challenge those adults who are going to tell them that they can't because they came from Brownsville, right? Make them read books that no one else would expect them to read. Because like when we had our kids reading Henrietta Lacks in 6th grade, I had so much criticism, like, how could you do that? You know, they can't read. Kids understand the story of a Black woman who's been oppressed, who's been treated wrongly in the healthcare system. How are you going to tell me they don't know what the story's about? They were very clear. The woman was a poor woman who made sacrifices. That's their grandmama, their aunties, their mamas, their godmothers. So the kids understood and connected with the story. But you had adults who were afraid of the book. So let's speak on that on another subject, right? So bringing it back, the problem that I had was because I was doing all of these things to keep putting a light on what is possible makes other people feel uncomfortable because now it forces them to have to rise to that occasion, right? And my parents didn't know the questions to ask. I was the parent in the classroom asking the questions. I was the one pushing my team to be better. And I was pushing my kids to say, this isn't it. And don't be sitting here accepting anything. I don't care what adult is in front of you, right? And I was willing to do that because it wasn't about chastising someone. People's lives are on the line. So if the teachers didn't get better, they would think that this is okay, you're killing kids. The kids would think this is okay, they're not gonna get a job, they end up in jail or they end up dead. There was just too much at stake. When I found myself, all three of you here in front of me, right? I've called y'all, I've cried, I fought, I wanted to leave for the longest time, but the only thing that kept me there was what? My kids. It was always my kids. And so during the pandemic, when I saw how much wasn't being done, that's where the conversations of the building blocks came in. That's when On the Low came in, because I felt like there was no one actually willing to speak about it. And it came out of fear, because I understand what that fear looks like. I've dealt with it a lot. And there are people who literally bully their way into positions and bully their way against adults who are really trying their best. And unfortunately, when you are a principal, no one has your back. So you get written up, you get pushed out. And so I dealt with a lot of stuff. And, you know, being on the outside and being on a leave and being able to support my team, I saw what they were going through. I saw how much we were talking about on, you know, publicly, it's like we're closing the equity gap, but no, we weren't. We weren't if we weren't showing up and teaching live. We weren't if we weren't communicating with parents every other week. We weren't if we weren't providing mental health services to family members who were dying, staff members, teachers, kids, everybody. Like everyone needed mental health services. And there was not an email, there was not an address of it. So I had to make a concerted decision that I can no longer stay in a position where it was going from DOE to DIE. That wasn't going to be my story. It wasn't going to happen.
Oh.
And so here I am, and I'm always going to advocate for our community. I got a lot out of the Department of Education. I got the best experience, but be very clear. It is a place that is very oppressive, and it's oppressive because of people. So we need to change, right? And as parents, we need to step up. As community members, you don't have to be a parent. Y'all need to just show up in general and make sure that you are like standing up for kids, being a resource to kids. It's not enough to talk about anti-racism. It's not enough, because we were supposed to talk about this, but we'll talk about this next time. There are children who are not part of the inclusion of schools, who are further marginalized. There are adults who are in positions who are supposed to protect those children, and they don't. So I not only represent myself, I represent Lashawnna, I represent Verta, I represent Geo, I represent every single leader who has worked extremely hard. I was a dinosaur in my position, still fighting. I wasn't sitting in my office. I wasn't trying to figure things out. I was fighting for my kids. And to this day, I still love it. And if I could go back, I would. But I'm not going to allow myself to die for a system where they get on press conferences and they talk a good game, knowing that they're not going to do a damn thing for our children. So I'm going to leave it right there. I'm sorry, everybody. But with that said, I wanted to make sure that if there were questions that folks had, I'm looking on Instagram, I'm looking on YouTube as well. If people had questions to anything, I don't see it. But if you don't have questions at this time, we are always available. We make ourselves available, to support you, to be a resource. But just know that we do this again out of love. And so I'm going to let each of my members on the collective share their final words as we close out, because we want to make sure that we are leaving you with some type of deposit before we end this conversation. So Lashawnna?
I guess my final words would be, it's doable. Just seek help. There's help out there. It may not be what you're used to, or what you may not get the help from people who you expected to get help from, but there are people out there, and you just have to ask if to reach out.
Verta?
Because I have a quote that I have to do in the book. It's not long, it's not as long as last time, but this is heavy. Layman, I'm going to say the last name, so I don't want to butcher his first name. And I met him before.
Kiese.
Say it again.
Kiese. It's Kiese, right? Layman.
There were so many things we needed in classrooms, in our city, in our state, and in our country that our teachers could have provided, could have gone home and really done their homework. Never once said the words economic mass incarceration, homophobia, empire, mass eviction, post-traumatic stress disorder, neo-Confederacy, mental health, or I loved all my teachers, and I wanted all my teachers to love us. Or finish. But I felt like we spent much of our time teaching them how to respect where we've been, and they spent much of their us teaching them how to be treated. And on that, I'm just gonna say, I'm just gonna leave it there.
Geovanti.
Two things really stand out for me about tonight's conversation. One is just hearing each of you at different times say that this is an opportunity to think differently, to do things differently, to be greater than we were before. And that really resonates with me. And I think I need to hold on to that energy myself. And the second thing that really resonates with me is what Verta said earlier about, I'm a product, as many of us are, of the system. My thinking, my striving to become a leader, a lot of that was under ideals of oppression and ideals of this is what is right. So until you figure out what the hell we think is right, you're not going to be invited to the club. And so I love that idea, and I have to say it to myself, not just to white people. Like I got to check my own thinking, my own ways, my own expectations, my own language. Um, because I try to, but I need to always do that. And that, thank you, Verta. Thank you, girl.
That shit is hard.
So it's funny that Verta read that book from Kiese Lamont. He was a professor at Vassar College, and my scholars had the opportunity of meeting with him. I had two different, when I was an assistant principal and when I was a principal, they were able to meet him and be in his classroom before he wrote his book, before he was that person. And it speaks to individuals' characters and what they believe in our children. A lot of the young people in my, when I was an AP, did not believe that they belonged in college. They couldn't think past Brownsville. They couldn't even think past the high school in Brownsville. And when he gave them an assignment to do, they were like, why are we doing work? We didn't come here to do work. We came here for a tour. And he was like, y'all gonna do this assignment, right? He came with expectations for them. He had them write, and by the time they were done, he said, you just completed an English 101 class. So if you can do it here while you're in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, you can definitely do this when you get to college. 24 out of 25 of those students went to college just because of the conversation he had with them and because he poured into them and showed them what was possible as a Black man in Air Force Ones, a tweed jacket, and some jeans, okay? And so I want us to understand that there is hope even in the place that's hopeless. I was able to do it by opening up a school. Lashawnna, Verta, and Geo. We opened up schools in places that people wouldn't want to open up schools, and we created something unbelievable and dynamic. We know what is possible. When we are speaking and we are passionate about this, is because we know what people are failing to do for our children. So all we ask is that you hear us. You don't need to be us, right? What we need you to be is yourselves. What we need you to be is in belief of children. To remember that favorite teacher who made you just want to go to school, who made you think bigger than life and encourage you in ways that you never even imagined. And because of them, you are here and you're able to be the beautiful soul giving life to others. We want the system to be dismantled in a way that it is rebirth for the needs of those who need it the most. It's not much we're asking, but the four of us collectively, our goal has been to share and impart knowledge so that you are armed, so that you can show up, so that you can advocate. Because our children need each and every one of you. So we hope that as you walk away, it's always important that one, you are gentle and kind with yourselves. Please, please, please engage in some type of self-care in the next 24 hours because you are all you have and your family and your friends need you. Secondly, we hope that you come back. We're here every Wednesday, 8 p.m., Lord have mercy. But please make sure that you subscribe to this channel on YouTube. Those who are on Instagram, I try to make sure I let you all be a participant because y'all will not follow me where I say to go. And I love you, but I need y'all to follow on the other side. But lastly, our ancestors are watching. And they are proud of this day because we are working together as a collective. We want to continuously move in their spirit and make sure that their legacy continues because they did not die, they did not give sacrifice. They did not live the lives that they lived so that we can feel them. So until next time, folks, we wish you well. Have a good evening.
Oh, Lashawnna just was like,